Hey, amazing teachers! If you've been wondering what comprehension-based assessments are, how to use them in your classroom, and if they can actually save you time, you're in the right place. In this video, I'm going to answer those questions and show you exactly how these assessments can make your life easier while boosting student success. Stick around because I've got some powerful time-saving tips that will transform how you assess your students without adding to your workload. So imagine this. You've been teaching for weeks. Students have been soaking up the language in class. And then comes the dreaded assessment. Normally, what do? We throw a grammar quiz or a vocab test their way and hope they remember enough to score well, right? But here's the problem. Does that really show what they can do with the language? If your students are memorizing conjugations or definitions just to pass, are they actually learning how to communicate in the language? That's where things start to get tricky. Now, what if your assessments didn't focus on whether a student could recite grammar rules, but instead asked them to use the language in meaningful ways? What if you could assess their real understanding, like whether they can follow a story or engage in a conversation? That's the beauty of comprehension-based assessments. Instead of measuring how well they've crammed, these assessments focus on whether they're grasping the language at a deeper level. But what does that look like? Hang tight, because this is where it gets good. The magic happens when you shift your mindset from what facts do they know to how well can they understand and use the language. Comprehension-based assessments reflect real-world situations, like interpreting conversations, understanding narratives, or responding to questions in context. Think about it. When you're out in the world speaking a language, no one's going to quiz you on the subjunctive or make you list irregular verbs. They're going to expect you to understand what's happening and respond accordingly. These assessments mimic exactly that, giving you a clear picture of how your students will handle the language in real-life scenarios. And the payoff? Well, your students won't just be cramming for the test anymore. They'll be actively building skills that make them more confident, fluent communicators. And that is the ultimate goal, right? You're in the middle of a lesson and everything's going great. Students are nodding along, they're picking up the story you're telling, and it feels like they're really getting it. But then comes the time to assess. You don't want to stop the momentum with a boring quiz that doesn't capture what they've just learned. So what do? Do you throw out the textbook test and hope for the best? Not quite. There's a way to assess them while keeping the excitement and engagement rolling. The trick is all about making assessments a natural extension of your lessons, not a break from them. Let's start with one of the easiest, most effective tools, storytelling. You're already telling stories in your class, right? Well, assessments can flow right out of that. After telling a story, instead of hitting them with a multiple choice test, why not ask students to retell the story in their own words or answer open-ended questions about what happened? It's all about gauging their understanding without them even realizing they're being tested. And here's the kicker. You're assessing not just their memory, but how well they comprehend and can manipulate the language in real time. Another fun, easy-to-implement strategy is comprehension checks throughout your lesson. Rather than waiting for a big, stressful test day, build in quick checks as you go. Pause mid-lesson and ask them to show their understanding through quick activities like a short response, a pair-share conversation, or even a thumbs-up, thumbs-down signal to show if they're following along. These quick, formative assessments give you a real-time pulse on how well they're grasping the material. And it's way more effective and fun than waiting for a test at the end of the week. And when it comes to summative assessments, here's a game changer: proficiency assessments. Imagine wrapping up a unit by having students create something like a comic strip, or the story you've been working on, or a skit where they use the vocabulary and structures they've been learning. You get to see them using the language, and they get to show off their creativity and understanding in a low-pressure, highly engaging way. Suddenly, assessments are less about stress and more about demonstrating language use in the real-world context. Now, by the time you start incorporating these methods, you'll notice your students are more engaged, less anxious, and much more confident in their language skills. And you? Well, you have a clearer picture of how much they're really learning, without the headache of grading piles of tests. Now that's a win-win. If classroom management has you feel like you're herding cats, it's time to check out my dynamic discipline course. It's a 10-part series all about building solid relationships with your students so classroom chaos becomes a thing of the past. Whether you're dealing with talkative teens or daydreaming students, we've got strategies that actually work. And here's the best part. No more yelling or endless rule lists. You'll get live webinars, on-demand access, exclusive resources, and a community of teachers who've been there, done that. Sounds like something you need? Head over to mm.us/discipline to sign up. Let's turn your classroom into a place where learning actually happens, minus the chaos. See you inside. Let's be honest. As teachers, we all want to save time, especially when it comes to grading. You spend hours creating assignments, and then boom, a stack of papers to grade shows up like an uninvited guest. Not fun, right? But what if there was a way to cut down on all of that tedious grading and still know exactly how well your students are progressing? That's the magic of comprehension-based assessments, and trust me, it's way easier than it sounds. Now here's the deal. Traditional assessments often focus on those tiny details, like filling in the blanks or memorizing isolated vocabulary, that require endless grading and don't really show how well students understand the language. Comprehension-based assessments, though, they're all about the bigger picture. Instead of marking 100 answers right or wrong, you're assessing whether students get the language. Do they understand the story? Can they respond meaningfully in context? It's less about correcting minor errors and more about seeing the full scope of their understanding, which, surprise, means less grading time for you. One of the biggest time-saving strategies here is using rubrics. Instead of poring over each individual mistake, create a simple rubric that focuses on key areas of comprehension. Did they follow the story? Did they grasp the main ideas? Are they able to use the language meaningfully? A rubric lets you evaluate those big picture skills at a glance, cutting down on grading time while still giving you a clear sense of their progress. Plus, rubrics make expectations clear for students, which means better results from them and less confusion for you. And here's an even better hack: self-assessment. Yep, get your students involved in the process. After a storytelling activity or a performance task, ask them to rate their own understanding or ability to retell the story. You'll be surprised how honest and insightful their self-assessments can be. Not only does this give them ownership of their learning, but it also saves you from having to grade every single part of their work. Combine that with peer assessments, where students give feedback to each other, and suddenly you've got a classroom running smoothly without all that extra grading on your plate. And by the end of it, you'll find that comprehension-based assessments actually give you more time to focus on teaching and less time stuck in grading mode. And let's be real, who doesn't want a little more time back in their day? All right, that's a wrap. I hope these tips make comprehension-based assessments not only easier, but also way more effective in your classroom. Now, if you're curious about the top 5 assessment myths that might be holding you back, check out this next video. I promise you don't want to miss it. And before you go, let me know in the comments, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to assessing your students? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Happy comprehensible input.